justice, temperance, wisdom, courage. Applying ancient philosophy to modern times, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Wow, episode 19 of the Sunday Stoic. When I first started this podcast a few months ago, I intended to do 10 episodes and then probably quit. But I found it useful to keep going, and apparently some of you do as well. We've had a total of around 16,000 downloads. So each episode has been downloaded, several hundred times, and that's pretty cool. If you want to share with your friends, please do so, and leave a review on iTunes. That will help. And most importantly, email me, sundaystoic@gmail.com, to let me know what you think about the show, to volunteer to read, or to request certain topics to be covered. So, this week we're talking about food. And your diet is one of those real hard things to change. Everyone has trouble with weight loss, right? And that's because it's difficult. And even the Stoics knew this. They knew that altering your diet and eating in a healthy way was going to be hard. And we'll hear about that this week. We're going to hear from 3 Stoics this week: Epictetus, Seneca, and a new one this week, Musonius Rufus. I have found a work that appears to be in the public domain, a translation of his teachings, and I'll post a link to that online, and I also encourage you to pick up a copy of his translations on Amazon.com, as they are quick reads and full of actual practical wisdom, how to apply Stoicism in daily life. So let's jump right in to those 3 readings, and then we'll discuss how we're going to apply them in our daily lives in the year 2017. Musonius Rufus, Stoic Fragments. 18b, on Food. Translated by Cora Lutz. High living is nothing but excess and table luxury. Now excess is always evil. But here, particularly, it reveals its true nature in these people, since it makes them greedy like swine or dogs rather than men, and incapable of behaving properly with hands or eyes or gullet. So completely does the desire for pleasure in the dainties of the table pervert them. How shameful it is to behave toward food in this way, we may learn from the fact that we liken them to unreasoning animals rather than to intelligent human beings. Now, if this is shameful, the opposite must be altogether good. That is, exercising moderation and decorum in eating. Demonstrating one's self-control there, first of all. Not an easy thing to do, but one which requires much attention and practice. Why should this be? Because, although there are many pleasures which lure man into wrongdoing and force him to yield them to contrary to what is good, pleasure in eating is probably the hardest of all to combat. For other pleasures we encounter less often, and we can refrain from some of them for months and whole years, but of necessity we are tempted by this one every day, usually twice a day, since it is not possible for man to live otherwise. Thus, the oftener we are tempted by the pleasure of eating, the more dangers there are involved. And indeed, at each meal there is not one hazard for going wrong, but many. First of all, the man who eats more than he ought does wrong, and the man who eats in undue haste no less, and the man who wallows in the pickles and the sauces, and the man who prefers the sweeter foods to the more healthful ones, and the man who does not serve food of the same kind to his guests as to himself. To keep himself blameless and free from such errors, one should, by constant practice, accustom himself to choosing food not for enjoyment, but for nourishment, not to tickle his palate, but to strengthen his body. Indeed, the throat was designed to be a passage for food and not an organ of pleasure, and the stomach was made for the same purpose as the root was created in plants. Furthermore, even if expensive and cheap food strengthen the body equally well, nevertheless one ought to choose the cheaper food because it is more conducive to temperance and more fitting for a good man. Moral Letters to Lucilius by Seneca, Letter 8, on the Philosopher's Seclusion, verse 5. Hold fast, then, to this sound and wholesome rule of life, that you indulge the body only so far as is needed for good health. The body should be treated more rigorously, that it may not be disobedient to the mind. Eat merely to relieve your hunger, drink merely to quench your thirst, dress merely to keep out the cold, house yourself merely as a protection against personal discomfort. It matters little whether the house be built of turf or variously colored imported marble. Understand that a man is sheltered just as well by a thatch as by a gold roof. Despise everything that useless toil creates as an ornament and an object of beauty, and reflect that nothing except the soul is worthy of wonder. The Enchiridion by Epictetus, number 41. It is the mark of want of genius to spend much time in things relating to the body, as to be long in our exercises, in eating and drinking, and in the discharge of other animal functions. These should be done incidentally and slightly, and our whole attention be engaged in the care of the understanding. So typically, at least in my life, I have 3 meals a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And according to Musonius Rufus, each one of those is a complex moral dilemma where I can make lots of terrible decisions. I can eat too quickly. I can eat the wrong foods, unnatural foods. And what kind of foods would Musonius and Seneca and others prefer we eat? Well, based on the readings that I have found, it would be simple foods like a piece of bread and some water would suffice. Something simple. It seems the more time you put into preparing a fancy dinner, the less impressed a Stoic would be. Musonius also advocates to eat a vegetable-based diet, as meat will kind of slow you down and make you less intelligent and other things like that. So Stoics and modern Stoics, as well as ancient, appear to have often gone for a vegetarian-type diet. I don't know if that's 100% the case, though. We want to live according to nature. And we are beings that have evolved on this planet to be omnivores. That's the way I see it. But I would follow the advice of Michael Palin in the book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. He says, the basic tenets of the book are this: eat less, mostly plants. So what does that mean? Well, at least here in the United States, we have portion sizes that are ridiculous. So lower the portion sizes and make sure it's mostly plants on that plate. That doesn't mean you can't have meat, but as a Stoic, it is your responsibility to ensure that your meal is moral, right? So where was that meat raised? Was it ethically treated? Are you okay eating that organism? My personal belief is, if you have never butchered an animal, you should never eat an animal. Not that you have to butcher every animal that you eat, but if you have no concept of what it takes to raise and butcher an animal, then you probably shouldn't eat meat. It's unethical at that point. I grew up on a farm, and I know what it is to raise an animal and to butcher an animal. And I also occasionally go hunting, and I don't revel in the death of another organism. I am very careful about that. I am not as careful at the grocery store. I feel bad whenever I buy chicken because I know what kind of conditions they're raised in. I should buy from farmers markets more readily, and I should eat a more plant-based diet. But we know that every meal is a chance to mess up, but it's also a chance to improve. So I myself want to lose some weight, so I'm going to shift not to a vegetarian diet, but to a smaller portion, more plant-based diet. And I hope, using the Stoic diet plan, to lose several pounds over the next 6 months or so. So if it works out and the podcast is still going strong, I'll let you know how it works out. Another thing I find interesting is the Stoics advocate treating eating like fueling up your car. It's just something you have to do to survive, not something that you should enjoy or relish in. Well, I like to cook. I like trying different spices. I like different things. So that might not please the ancient Stoics, but I say all things in moderation. Maybe that's a bit Epicurean of me, but that's okay. The Stoics warn, once again, about eating for pleasure, and both in Musonius Rufus and in Seneca, they say you shouldn't put fancy sauces on your food. Enjoy the simple foods. The simple foods make you strongest, and it's a form of gluttony. You're kind of spoiled if you have to add special sauces to your food to enhance their flavor. It's a type of gluttony. So I don't think the Stoics would have approved of A1 or Sriracha, but like I said, I am not a Stoic stage, and I'm going to keep on using my Sriracha for a while until I become more morally perfect, I guess. But what can we do to implement this advice in our lives? Well, think about where your food comes from. Stoic morality applies to all aspects of your life. What's on your plate? Is there too much on your plate? Is it mostly the kind of foods we evolved to eat? Mostly vegetables with a little bit of meat? Where was that meat raised? How was it treated when it was alive? Was it ethical? How was it slaughtered? What kind of life did that organism have? These are the kinds of things you want to think about and determine where your boundaries are and what you're comfortable with as a Stoic. But that's enough of that. Once again, thank you all for listening to the show. We've had downloads all around the world, so Dobry den, Guten Tag, and howdy to everyone out there. And I appreciate you listening, ranking the show on iTunes, shooting me emails, and encouraging me to keep on keeping on, because I've thought about stopping the show in the past, and I get an email every few days saying, hey, I like your show, keep it up, and I appreciate that. It's good to know that people are listening and that you're getting a little something out of these episodes. So thank you for that. Shoot me an email, sundaystoic@gmail.com. Be stoic and carpe diem.